Good morning and welcome to the Foster Swift Sports Talk podcast. I'm your host, Dave Russell. I'm joined with my two co-hosts, Charlie Sarche and Tony Delamonte. This week, we're going to continue talking about the ever-changing landscape and not just college sports, but maybe how that may impact high school sports. And who better to talk to about that than the executive director for the Michigan High School Athletic Association. We have Mark Ewell today. Thank you, Mark, for joining us.
Good to be with you guys.
So last week we had Coach Boss on, and we were talking about the House settlement and revenue sharing and NIL. And so we thought, who would be best to talk to on, the high school side of things and how that may impact. And so we appreciate you coming on to talk to us about that.
You bet.
And to my understanding, you've been with the Michigan High School Athletic Association since 2004.
21 years.
So you've seen all the changes along the way for a long time.
I've lived through a pandemic. Yes, a little bit of everything. And, my hobby in life has been a little interesting. I umpired baseball in the Big Ten and the Big 12 for over 20 years. So had that, very consistent interaction with what's going on at the next level. And then with my own three kids. So I've got three kids, and of the three of them, they'll all play at the three levels. So I've had a Division I football player. He just finished his career at the United States Air Force Academy, which ironically is one of the three Division I schools that does not allow their kids to earn any NIL money. And then my oldest, now our law school kid, he was a pretty good Division III swimmer at Hope College. And then last but not least, our youngest will head off to play women's basketball next year at Grand Valley State. So it's been, yes. So with the day job over the last 21 years, and then you mix in a little bit of officiating, and then with your own three kids' experiences at each of the three levels, it's a really interesting time right now in college sports.
It really is. And so first, you were a D1 official for a number of years, so you heard from fans, coaches yelling at you for a number of years, and you switched to becoming the executive director of the Michigan High School Athletic Association, and then you get hit by a pandemic. So you must have real thick skin.
It is about as thick as it can get. I'm not sure a rhinoceros has much on me right now, but no, those have all been, though, really interesting lessons in leadership because, in this day and age with social media and the internet, and, I think we're somewhat of a nation of overreactors, and everything needs to be an emotional, immediate reaction, and then we're on to the next thing that we're outraged about. With a lot of issues, and especially with NIL, I think it needs to be very factual. It needs to be very rational. And I think if you can approach the issue through that lens, I think you make more of the right decisions than wrong. So
in your position, how closely are you following? I don't know if you know, but this week they had the House settlement, the hearing in front of Judge Wilkin. Is that something that you're following?
Every day.
Okay. And, what do you see that impact on high school athletics?
So I think from a 30,000-foot view, and of course we had a bill last year that in our own legislature that got passed by the House and eventually stalled out in the Senate as during the kind of interesting end to the legislative session going back to last December. But so from a 30,000-foot view, there's always, I think, a little bit of a predisposition to whatever goes on in the college level just naturally should trickle down to some extent to the high school level. And what, we've really tried to tell people is, NIL to me at the collegiate level makes sense, right? Because at the Power 4 level, it is a billion-dollar industry that is being run by millionaires. You have million-dollar coaches and in a handful of cases, even some million-dollar administrators. And I think it's reasonable in that case that the student athlete should get a piece of the economic action. If I'm a cog in the wheel here of this billion-dollar enterprise, then that money should get all the way down essentially to the labor force in that scenario, and kids should be able to profit with that. The high school dynamic is completely different. We've got 752 member high schools of the MHSAA, so approximately 750 high schools in our state, each of which are part of an athletic department that is hoping to break even. So there's no billion-dollar industry. The average coaching salary right now for a high school coach in the state of Michigan is about $3,200 a season. So there's obviously no millionaire coaches. So what makes it a little bit different at our level in the high school space is there isn't a billion-dollar industry being run by millionaires, and therefore shouldn't these students get a piece of the economic action. So that's where you first of all have to say that we are completely different from the college level. I would argue that college sports is no longer amateur sports. College sports has become professional sports with almost no rules or guidelines until the settlement, I think, eventually reaches the finish line, which we hope is going to be sooner rather than later. You can't lose sight that NIL, as it was intended, it's got to go back to the Ed O'Bannon case. And Ed O'Bannon's biggest issue when he played basketball at UCLA was that he would play the video game. And in the video game, it was him. It was the UCLA jersey. I think he was number 31. Don't quote me on that. But essentially, he should get some benefit of someone making money on that. And the whole premise of NIL at the college level was, well, this was going to be a way to give our student athletes some money, right? It was the money in your pocket to go to a movie on the weekend and pizza and this kind of stuff, that there would be some economic impact for the students. And really what NIL has become is it's in NIL, it's again, using your name, image, and likeness. NIL is essentially your ability or your right to publicize yourself. So to me, that implies that you have to provide some kind of a service, and in return, you can be paid for that. Forever at the college level, athletes could not work because you were a full scholarship athlete, and there were lots of limitations on what you could do in terms of employment. Therefore, you couldn't get paid because simply you were an athlete. Well, that has now changed. But at the college level, there's no longer a service anymore. My son, as I said, played at Air Force, so they had a sophomore defensive end who had a really nice year this past fall as a sophomore. Well, at the three academies, you can leave with no foul as long as it's before the start of your junior year. So this sophomore, ironically, is right here in town. David Santiago, defensive end. He's going to play for the Spartans this coming fall. And during his process, you're literally talking, they would refer to it as a bag. In other words, what kind of a bag in terms of what kind of money am I going to get if I would go to Michigan State, or if I'm going to go to this school or to that school? So what's now got completely blurred at the college level is there's really kids no longer providing a service. There's no kind of a student employment in return. As an athlete, here are the benefits I'm going to get. NIL has now literally become this bag of money that I'm going to get based on how good I am, kind of where the slot is. And so where we get a little bit protective of where we're at is if this is what NIL now looks like at the college space, and to me it looks more and more worse as every day goes by, then why at the high school level would we want to say, hey, come on, bring this to our level as quickly as possible? So for us going really slow in this area, I think that's actually been a benefit until we really see what the settlement looks like. Hopefully then the college space somewhat solidifies, and then I think we'll be in a better position to make some decisions moving forward.
So, Mark, it seems like high school NIL, if it happens at all in Michigan, which, I mean, it seems like it likely will eventually, but it seems like these opportunities for high school athletes will be rare if they happen. They're going to be case-by-case basis, very rare instances. And actually, just to quote you in a source that I found, you said that NIL opportunities for high school students are going to be individual opportunities for individual kids, right? So, like, the schools aren't involved, boosters aren't involved. It's going to be a rare opportunity for students.
That is the hope, and that is the quote that I use every single day whenever I get asked about this, because again, going back to Ed O'Bannon. So if he's going to be used in the video game, then he should be able to profit for that. So that's Ed O'Bannon on his own as an individual, profiting from the use of his publicity, his use in the video game, and that's where the money should change hands. It had nothing to do with UCLA. It had nothing to do with boosters. It had nothing to do with a collective. It had nothing to do with, keep on filling in the blanks. So what we could live with at the high school level are individual opportunities for individual kids. Once we allow the high school booster club to become the collective, or the NIL group, or the dad's group becomes that. And now money is going to change hands that either encourages kids to go to a certain high school or keeps certain kids at certain high schools. As far as I'm concerned, we're turning into AAU. I'm now going to then play for 4 different AAU teams in each of my 4 different years. When you take NIL and then you add that to the college level with the current transfer portal, they've really almost become synonymous. I'm going to jump into the portal, and how big is my NIL bag, and what does that exactly look like? So what I found, so there's 30 other states that have allowed some kind of NIL. And I would argue, for example, we already allow some of these things. So forever, a student could have put his or her own name on a summer camp. So let's just use him as an example. So Bryce Underwood, who graduated early from Belleville, he's now at the University of Michigan. Bryce Underwood, the last 3 years, could have had the Bryce Underwood football camp every year, and he could have been paid. He could have put his name on it. That's already allowed under our amateur status rules, because the concept is that if you're running your own camp, there is legitimate work, and then in return, you were able to get legitimate pay. That's why a lot of our high school golfers and tennis players can give private lessons, those kinds of things. So it's got to be individual. Once you make it for a group or some kind of a collective effort, that's the line in the sand. But the 30 or so states that have passed this, what I hear from all of them is this affects less than 1%. I can tell you, with my oldest being a pretty good Division III swimmer, there is no NIL market for Division III athletes. My hunch is that at the D2 level, even at a big, the Grand Valley women won the national championship here a month ago. There is no real NIL market even at the Division II level. So it's really for those outlier kids, a very small percentage. But I think the reason we have to stay in tune with it is, what I wouldn't want to do is for us to completely cross our arms and stick our head in the sand and say, never, ever, ever will any NIL opportunities be available in Michigan, because now you get that Bryce Underwood type player that once every 20-year type kid. Well, now he or she, or if it's happens to be a girl on a girls team, I have a really good freshman year, a really good sophomore year, and now going into my junior year, well, I guess our family needs to move to Arkansas or Tennessee or another state where they do allow some of this, because, again, it's a very small number of kids, but the money for that very top of the pyramid type kid is real money. It's life-changing money, and so that's why we need to be very in tune with what other states are doing, and I think we need to do it smartly. We need to do it I think with a little bit of common sense, but also knowing what else is out there.
So what can't high school students do then? So other states I know prohibit students using, the school's mascot, their logo, stuff like that when they are doing deals like this. So specifically, what can students not do when they're trying to do a deal like this?
Let me piggyback on that question too, because I was going to ask the same question. And my daughter, she's committed to play lacrosse at Pitt, and I had a question. Lucky enough that I know John Ross from your office. Little plug for John, great guy, and he gave the answer. And my question was, she wants to give some lessons, charge for lessons. Can she do that? I didn't know that, and I didn't really know where to look, and it was an easy email. The response, I believe, was she can absolutely do that, but she can't wear her school jersey.
Yeah, that's a pretty narrow interpretation there by John, that, a lot of times when you're giving lessons and those kinds of things, you can absolutely be paid. You can work a camp, those kind of opportunities with really very little restrictions. It's no different than you take in the parallel I often try and make is, okay, let's take this really good high school athlete and imagine that he or she is a really good high school musician, or a really good in an area of fine arts, to where, okay, it's that high-end music student, and he or she can give lessons. They can, School of Rock, one of my absolute favorite movies, that after school type program, to where I'm taking a special gift or a talent I have, and I'm able to monetize on that. It's not just because you're part of the Hazlitt, fine arts program, and that's the reason I'm getting this money. I'm doing individual work. again, legitimate work for legitimate pay. And that's something where I don't think that just because you're an athlete in high school that the answer to you should be no, to where with all other high school kids you have those kind of opportunities. If you want to go out and you want to have an entrepreneurial spirit and you want to, again, take what your areas of interest are. My own daughter does that. She gives some basketball training stuff, which again is all allowed currently under our rules.
What about if a car dealership, because you see it a lot of times in college sports, you see college athletes being on commercials with law firms and car dealerships. If someone wanted to call up a 5-star football recruit or a basketball recruit who's a current high school student, are they allowed to do that under MHSAA's rules?
Currently, no, because now that begins to blur the line with undue influence or anti-recruiting rules to where if it is now that 5-star type kid and now there's an extra benefit being given to that kid, and of course, I think in your scenario, he's not underneath the hood doing work on the car. He's not down working at the car dealership. So in this case, again, to me, NIL is you have to do something. You can use your name, your image, your likeness. You provide a service, and in return, you can then be paid for that. Well, in your scenario, it sounds like, hey, I'm just a really good athlete, and somebody wants to give me a bag full of cash and use my name. Well, that right there, I would say, well, is there now something behind the curtain? Is that a booster at the school, a connected alum? We're trying to get you to come to the school. We want to keep you at this school. And so currently that would not be allowed under our current rules. And I think if we would open the door to allow some more NIL opportunities, I think that would also be on the no list. The one area here that I want to figure out a solution to is the whole social media influencer. So I'm a 51-year-old guy. I think Dave and I are probably in the same general age range.
Yes.
And, Charlie and Tony, you guys are the young guys here on the crew.
Charlie might have some high school eligibility left.
But, so obviously I look at the world differently than what my 3 kids do. And if someone, whether it's because you're a good athlete or whether you're really slick at social media, you can draw a following. And if some company or enterprise, because of the number of followers you have, wants to pay you for posting about this or posting about that or endorsing this or endorsing that, I do not see that as something that creates much heartburn for us. And that is where, from everything I've learned, is where at the high school level in the states that allow it, that's where the majority of NIL money is made. And they're not big number deals either, by the way. They're actually quite small, modest agreements. And, I post something, once a week or 3 times a month. And in return, this is what I'm going to get. Again, I don't know if that's because you're an athlete or it's because you're, funny and you put together, really good TikTok videos. And because of that, if you want to monetize that, I don't think anybody in athletic leadership is worrying about that. What I do worry about is that car dealership or that front for a booster club or some groups where they're going to kind of use that as a way to either attract kids or keep kids. Because I think if we get to that point, it then becomes a game of the haves and the have-nots. And it's too simplistic to say, well, the non-public schools are going to benefit over the public schools. Well, we have a lot of very well-to-do, very connected public schools as well. So I think regardless of the kind of school you are, you just want to be very careful, because at the end of the day, what's our job? It's to provide as equal of a playing field as we can for athletic competition. And the more things like that that you described you allow, I think that level playing field becomes a lot more uneven.
Where would you direct high school athletes to if they have a question, if they have an opportunity?
It's to their school's athletic director. So we're an association of member schools. And while I would love to speak to every athletic parent in our state, we have about 180,000 kids each school year that participate in at least one high school sport. Would love to connect with everybody individually. I think I heard from everyone during COVID. But it's really to go back and work through your schools. Our amateur status rules currently govern a lot of this activity now. And in our rules, you won't see name, image, and likeness anywhere in our rules, but some of the things that typically are allowed under NIL are currently allowed under our rules. Like we talked about the coaching, the giving lessons, those kinds of things. And when we meet with our board here in a month, we're going to look at opening up the door on some of these social media influencing things. even at autograph type sessions. If you happen in your community to have a high enough stature or profile to where somebody wants to give you money to video a birthday greeting and they pay you $25 for that, or they're going to pay you, a couple $100 to show up in an autograph session, and that's going to happen. Well, again, that's legitimate work for legitimate pay. And so would that be something that would then be allowed under our rules? But as an association of member schools, questions or issues with that always start at your school athletic director, and a lot of times that'll move up the chain and get to our building.
So a part of the House settlement is that the NCAA is going to have a clearinghouse where people will be reporting NIL deals north of $600. How will you guys be monitoring NIL deals at the high school level? Is there a committee? Like, who's going to be in charge of getting those approved?
So part of the bill that ended up stalling in our legislature last year, one of the provisions that was put into it was that any NIL deal had to end up in our office with like a 14-day advance on it for us to review and approve that, to make sure that they complied with all of our amateur status and eligibility rules. So if we get to that point, I'm not sure what the dollar number would be with that, but I do think that some kind of oversight, and again, you can create a lot of online forms to where it gets submitted fairly quickly. So that's already something we had been planning for if it would have passed the Senate and then would have eventually been signed by Governor Whitmer. But, and that's what we do in all areas. We do a lot of monitoring of academic requirements, of the transfer rule, those kinds of things. And I think if NIL would be expanded, that would be a part of the process.
So one of the questions I have is related to, especially once this revenue sharing goes through, which I think it will, at least in some shape or form. These NCAA schools will be likely entering into contracts with high school students, which means high school students. So if you have, let's say, a junior in high school that's going to play for a big time program, they're going to sign a revenue sharing agreement or maybe an NIL agreement. Are they at risk for their eligibility at that point if they sign it?
So we would allow a carve out like that. And we already allow, there are lots of kids who commit as either sophomores or juniors, and you're committing to an awful lot of benefits that really don't start or kick in until after your high school career concludes. Now that's gotten a little trickier here in recent years, as a lot of football players, for example, I'm out of here at December of my senior year. I'm going to graduate early so I can take advantage of spring ball. That's made it a little bit trickier in trying to hold off some of those benefits until your high school career ends. But there is no heartburn that we get that if you sign an agreement with a college and once you become a part of that program, here are the benefits that you get. If that's part of this contract, which, and by the way, I think contracts are desperately needed at the college level, because essentially it's currently pro sports without any kind of contracts. I mean, everybody's a free agent. But I think that kind of, if you commit to a college with here are the benefits that come with that, and it's all done above board, I don't see that being any issue with our current. You would keep your eligibility.
So the only issue would be is if there was some kind of benefit that was received immediately upon execution of the contract.
Correct. So for like a signing bonus. So if I'm a high school junior and I'm being offered by everybody and I decide to sign with the hometown team, Michigan State, well, now is that contract with Michigan State, which used to be your letter of intent. Well, now this contract that I'm signing, now is there a signing bonus of $50,000 up front? That's a detail we would need to work out yet. And I'm hoping at least there's somewhat of a consistent template that all schools would be using somewhat across the board. And that's the other problem right now with NIL is right now it's really governed state by state. So I think having some kind of a national standard with either the settlement answering that question, or I know that Congress is still, I think, poking around this issue to see if there needs to be some kind of a national legislative approach. Time will tell. But the more consistency we can bring to this across the 50 states, the better off we're going to be.
From a recruiting perspective, have you seen any changes since 2021, since Alston really? So you got out of a pandemic, and then we had the Wild West of NIL being allowed. From schools' perspective and students and their parents, have you seen any changes from a recruiting perspective? I know it starts early. It's always started early. But any change in priority or timelines or just sort of general sentiments?
I think fewer high school kids are now being recruited. When you have the portal and then you throw in some NIL money, it's any smart person with their money, right? If you're going to invest in something, in the stock market, is you're going to tend to go with a stock that's been around longer, has a strong track record of success. Well, those are the kind of wagons that you want to hook to. And so in this case would you rather than make that commitment to a 19 or a 20-year-old who has been a junior college All-American for a year or two, or frankly, for that matter, has been a D2 All-American or even in a mid-major. So I think what a lot of the Power 4 schools are now doing is, we'll still look at the high school space for the very top percentage of the high school kids. But a lion's share of our recruiting right now is we are after the portal, because why do I want to bring in an underdeveloped 17-year-old and commit thousands and thousands of dollars to this unknown? Or do I go to the kid who's been a superstar at the mid-major level the last 2 years, and I really know what I'm getting in terms of a very mature, talented kid? So, in which I think is sad, because you throw in COVID with the extra COVID year, and that already created a bit of a bottleneck for high school kids and opportunities at the next level. And then, Rick Pitino said it here a few weeks ago that, he's now the coach at St. John's, and he said, I no longer recruit high school kids. Yeah, I might show a little interest in a couple of 5-star kids, but my kids that I want to bring into my program have had successful freshman year somewhere. The running joke is it takes almost an hour to get through the handshake line whenever a Big Ten school plays a MAC school early in the season during the non-conference portion, because, the MAC kids who are really, really good, chances are they're going to be somewhere else their junior or senior year. And the Santiago, the Air Force kid, is the perfect example of that. Is there's a mid-major kid who had a great sophomore year, and now he suddenly finds himself playing in the Big Ten with a nice NIL package.
So do you foresee then in that situation that you're going to have more high school athletes that are going to say, I want to go play at Tony Delamonte's Brother Rice because I'm going to have a better chance if I come out of Brother Rice than I do, some public school?
Possibly. And I think that's something, it's not even so much private or public, but I just think it's a successful program. You could make the leap that if I go to Rockford High School in West Michigan, very successful program in a lot of sports, well, that's going to put me in a position to where we've had lots of kids go on to the next level. So whether it's a Rockford or a Brother Rice, I really think it's the more successful the school is, the more opportunities you're going to have. And then, too, what's made this even more complicated is we're not counting if a kid goes to a junior college or community college, that year or two that you play at the JUCO, that doesn't count toward your NCAA eligibility. So that's just yet another factor where the opportunities for kids coming out of high school are getting less and less every year. And it's just, I wonder at what point does that pendulum start to swing back the other way? College baseball, that's a world I lived in for a while. And, I know you had Coach Boss on, and, most of their recruiting now is all other colleges and JUCOs, to where rarely, again, it's that 5-star type kid that, that left-handed kid who can throw 95 coming out of high school. That's the high school kid we'll look at. But for that, who would be a solid roster type player for us, I'm going to look at the JUCO, or I'm going to look at a lower level and see if they can make the jump.
What are you seeing kids doing as a result? So are you seeing more kids go to the D2, D3 level, or somewhere where, they may have been the last guy on a Big Ten team, but now they're MAC or a different type of division. So I guess, what are you seeing kids do as a result?
I think kids are searching for opportunities, and if they can, I think they're quicker now, though, that if they get an opportunity at a lower level, they're not saying, well, okay, I'm an aspiring basketball player, and, the only real interest I had was I'm at Hope College. And, I would love to then be able to make the jump to the Division II level, or even maybe to a Western or a Central or to an Eastern. I think 10 years ago, that kind of kid would say, well, I guess my playing career is done. I really wanted to play Division I basketball somewhere. It's not going to happen. Well, today I can go to that smaller school, have a really, really good year, and now suddenly the doors of opportunity are there because I can make that jump to the bigger school, and I no longer have to sit out for a year because there's no transfer rules anymore. So I think the direct opportunities maybe at the Power 4 level for high school kids are less, but there's more pathways to get there. You just have to be patient over a few year period if that's really what you want to do.
And then the scholarship opportunities and the level or the quality of education that you could get from, a smaller school rather than forcing yourself into playing in a D1 program. There's benefits to that too.
Absolutely. And, so the whole thing with the NCAA, so we get the settlement in place. My fears continue to be, looking again just through the college lens, is that at some point, do the big 50 break away and say, we're going to do our own thing? We really don't need the NCAA. Let's have a 4-division structure. Let's say it's 60 schools. So let's have a 4-division structure of 15 schools. It basically is the current Big Ten. It's the current SEC, and then some of the more flagship schools out of the ACC or the Big 12. And now do they break off and they just become their own entity, which does make some sense. But then what I worry about is, okay, now what happens to the schools in the MAC or in Conference USA? And now the NCAA can continue to provide services and opportunities for the mid-majors and certainly Division II and Division III. Well, if the Big 60 end up breaking away, I'm guessing CBS isn't paying billions of dollars to cover that basketball tournament anymore that includes those 60. And now then how does that impact what Division II looks like in Division III? Does, if the Big 60 break away, do the Mid-American Conference schools, do they now look more like Division II and Division III schools? And if this is going to become all driven by NIL, then do we get out of the scholarship business altogether? If this is about making as much money as possible, then let's just make them employees, and that's what you're going to do. And let's get out of the charade, which in some cases is this concept. I roll my eyes whenever I see an NCAA commercial and they talk about the student athlete. Well, if we really cared about the student athlete, the UCLA track team would not be traveling to Rutgers to run on a Wednesday in April. It's no longer about the student athlete. It's about chasing TV dollars and consolidating as much power and juice in these few conferences. So that's a fear I have, is that the haves at that level might go do their own thing. And if they do, what's that look like for the have-nots?
That was well said. I think there's a lot of people that agree with you. When we had Coach Boss on last week, a big thing he talked about was the unintended consequences of this settlement, which is obviously driven by football and basketball.
Without question. And then I think that the one answer that none of us have yet is, okay, once the settlement gets finalized, and what's the number they're using? 20 million. If each school gets approximately 20 million and you're going to divvy that up, how long before the first Title IX complaint's going to be filed? And
it's probably being drafted right now.
You ain't kidding. And with that 20 million, what does that look like in terms of where that goes in terms of men's sports, women's sports? Is football part of the formula? Because, again, I know with roster limits, that's going to get cut down a little bit, but there are still more questions than answers. But I do think that some kind of a settlement or a process, once that gets established, I think at least that gives them a basement where they can start to build the house from.
And Mark, one of the things you mentioned was that you thought contracts were a good idea, and obviously as attorneys we think so too, and that's one of the services that we provide. Are there any restrictions on high school kids working with agents, attorneys, as it relates to their status as being an amateur?
So part of the bill that stalled last year is it actually would have allowed kids to have agents or advisors kind of work with them in some kind of a contractual relationship. We're still trying to kind of work through that issue of what that would look like, because I think that having sound legal advice is really, really important for lots of kids and families that are in that position, especially when it comes to issues of tax and in those things that kids typically do not think about. The part that you want to protect against, though, is sometimes these, some of the, let's say that, you get a handful of the most talented kids who come from the most challenging backgrounds. And your other fear then becomes, and you see this all the time in professional baseball, is you have a lot of agent type people that work in Latin America, and they try and find that next superstar is that 15-year-old, that 16-year-old. And while, yep, they're trying to open some doors for them, it also leads to some exploitation down the road as well. So I think it's putting some processes in place to where families and kids can get good, sound advice, but yet hopefully not creating some kind of a cottage industry of now kind of these middle people and runners to where, again, some of the most talented, but some of the most challenged in terms of their financial circumstances is you don't want to create almost kind of a subculture to where you've got some of those problems. Because, for example, the way it works in professional baseball, there are some of these agents that'll find that 15-year-old in Nicaragua, and basically what they'll do is say, look, I will give you and your family a $100,000 advance. And here's some money you guys can now get into some decent housing, and here's some money to where you can start to pay the bills and really give them an elevated status of life. Well, in the fine print of these deals, now when you get into professional baseball and now with each contract is that individual is taking, upwards of 50% of everything they earn. So again, I'm 16-year-old in really challenging circumstances. I'm going to take whatever you're going to give me right now. But yet for the next 10 years of my professional baseball career, those are the things, again, I think if we don't pay attention to what's happened in other sports, other levels, those are the things that have to be on your radar to make sure that if you are going to put something in place, it needs to make sense for everybody.
Yeah, and Coach Boss gave the example last week where he said that there's agents telling some of the guys that you need more strikeouts. So they're, shaking off pitches and changing their performance based on, advice that's not the coaches. And so I completely agree that you're going to have kids 14 to 17 years old. And, good advice is a good thing, but we've talked about that. We think there might be an increase in agents coming into high schools and trying to convince these kids. And I don't know if you've seen it already, but, we think that's a concern.
It is. And the group of individuals that was pushing the NIL bill the hardest last year wasn't families of really talented kids. It was a group of individuals that were really seeing themselves as, well, I could work as an agent in this space. So it was really somewhat, they were looking out for themselves first, which kind of was a little bit off-putting, that if we're going to put this in place, it really, in everything that we try and do in the high school space, it really is students come first. And as this was kind of moving down the tracks, it became pretty clear it wasn't about students being first.
So, Mark, what is your advice to, any high school recruit and their parents, as they're looking at this ever-changing landscape, and, what's your advice to them?
It would be to ask lots and lots of questions. The recruiting process for our own three kids, and I do get a little bit cynical with these high school signing days, that anybody going, and I get it, you want to celebrate that. But, if there would have been a signing day for our Division III kid, it would have been him signing his student loan paper. At the Division III level, there is no athletic scholarships. There is no support. But for our Division I and Division II kid, you need to ask lots and lots and lots of questions. As simple as if you're signing a scholarship, what a lot of people don't realize is those are 1-year agreements, which can be either terminated or renewed by the school. A lot of people think, well, when I get offered, that's a commitment of 4 or 5 years. That is not always the case. If you're being recruited and they're talking about NIL opportunities, well, again, how long does that last? What are my commitments to this? We've got a couple of businesses that are sponsoring certain teams at certain schools. So if, for example, I think the Ferris State women's basketball they have an NIL, a company that is sponsoring that program, and every kid on the roster, I believe, gets some NIL money. So with any of those, I think you need to ask a ton of questions. The landscape is changing as quickly as it is. Don't assume that everything that you're being told, and ask those questions. And when you get those answers, I think it's important to find some kind of a trusted advisor out there that, may have had kids go through that same experience, or even then taking that to maybe a local attorney and at least asking some questions to get the best advice possible.
Any final thoughts, guys?
I'm
Like
good.
I'm all
This was
set.
great.
Yeah, thanks so
Yeah.
much, Mark. We really appreciate it, and I hopefully you'll consider coming back and joining us again. I think this is going to be a topic that's going to be prevalent over the next couple of years, and it's great to hear your insight and really appreciate you being here.
Thanks for the time, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thanks, Mark.